13 ships versus 133 ships. Who wins? Well, the 13 ships. Yes, so this is just one of the reasons why Yi Sun-shin is remembered as one of the greatest naval commanders in history. But what made this battle even more crazy is that he fought this battle for a government that had arrested him and tortured him. Yeah, so this is the story of Yi Sun-shin. So it is 1592. Japan's ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi decides that he wants more than just Japan, and so he makes a plan to invade Korea and then to move on to conquer China. And so he sends his armies to Korea and they do pretty well. Korean defenses collapse pretty fast and major cities like Seoul and Pyongyang had been taken. But there was one problem for Japan. See, their armies needed food, weapons, reinforcements, and all of that had to travel by sea. So whoever controlled the ocean controlled the war, and that's where Yi Sun-shin enters the picture. So Yi Sun-shin was born in 1545 in Seoul during Korea's Joseon dynasty. As a child, he trained in archery, horseback riding, and read a lot of military texts. Now, as he grew older, he decided to pursue a career in the military. He failed the military exam on his first attempt, breaking his leg during a riding test, but Yi did not give up and he continued training and passed the exam soon after. Now, during his early career, he spent years stationed in remote border regions, defending against raids in the north. And so, in the 1580s, he had already become a seasoned officer, ready for a war that would go down in history as one of the greatest war performances ever. So in 1592, the war begins. The first naval battle of the war was at Okpo, and it is here that Yi showed his skill as he managed to destroy 26 out of the 50 Japanese ships while not losing any of his own. This shocked the Japanese, however they were still confident, especially due to the success on the land. Now, after this battle, he heard what was happening on the land, in that Japan was slaughtering and pillaging many towns, infuriated Yi and made him more determined to destroy them out at sea, to a point where he thought about going and attacking the main Japanese fleet at that moment, but thankfully stopped himself. The next major battle was the Battle of Sachon, and it is here that he would unveil his famous turtle ships. Yes, so these were massive armoured ships with the top of it having iron spikes, giving it a sort of shell-like appearance, hence the name turtle ships. Now these iron spikes were placed on the top to prevent the Japanese from boarding the vessel, something they were known to do. And this battle, just like the last, was a success, with Yi sinking 13 Japanese ships without losing a single of his own. Another impressive victory for the admiral. Next was the Battle of Hansan Island. Now this is important. It is here we unveiled a new tactic, the Hagikijin, or crane wing formation. This was a U-shaped formation used to encircle the Japanese ships inside of it, and then use cannon fire to absolutely destroy them. This was very effective. In fact, some estimates say 100 Japanese ships were destroyed, making this a huge victory for the Koreans. But it would not be the last. Now it's here that the story takes a weird turn. See, before the big 13 versus 133 battle, he received an order to defend a Japanese attack on the southern shores. However, Admiral Yi Sun-shin knew of these shores and knew how it was covered in sharp rocks and would be extremely dangerous to have a battle there. And he also questioned if the information was trustworthy. Now, as you may know, if you get an order in the military, you follow it, especially during times of panic. And so because he refused to go to these southern shores, he was immediately stripped of his rank and placed under arrest. And it didn't stop there. See, it is said that he was almost tortured to death by things like whipping, flogging, even burning. This, to the man who was just winning you battle after battle, is pretty crazy stuff. Now, eventually they stopped torturing him and he managed to avoid the death penalty and instead just be demoted back down to a common infantryman. So, because of this, another commander was handed the reins and his name was Won Kyun, and he led the ships into the Battle of Chilcheonyang, and it went absolutely terrible. Of the around 200 ships sent, Won Kyun lost about 188 of them. It is considered to be one of Korea's worst naval losses in this war and made the government look pretty bad, seeing as they were the ones who got rid of the guy who was winning them every battle. And so after this battle, they quickly pardoned Yi and reinstated him as the admiral, setting the stage for Yi's greatest feat at the Battle of Myeongyang. So Yi Sun-shin knew he had only 13 ships left due to the previous battle, and so he decided to have the battle at the Strait of Myeongyang. This was a strategic decision, as he knew that the Japanese ships would have to funnel in order to attack, meaning they couldn't bring all of their fleet at the same time, as well as the fact that the tidal flows in these waters reversed every few hours, meaning if you weren't used to sailing in the strait, it would be quite difficult. Now, once the battle began, he allowed the Japanese fleet to funnel in, and then from the north, he began his advance. At first, it was only his ship that started to fire upon the Japanese fleet, as his other ships were scared, and even some say were planning to escape due to them being heavily outnumbered by the Japanese. However, as he started to fire and deal a lot of damage to the Japanese fleet, the rest of the Korean ships came in and joined in. And then, as more and more Japanese ships started to come in, the tide started to shift, which meant that the Japanese ships started to drift backwards, colliding with the other Japanese ships, causing mass panic. Yi capitalized on this and continued to fire, destroying ship after ship, eventually destroying at least 30 ships, and even killed the Japanese commander. After losing so many ships and men, the Japanese halted their advance, ending the battle. Now, this battle should have been an easy victory for the Japanese. However, due to Yi Sun-shin's tactics, he managed to pull off one of, if not perhaps the greatest, naval victory in Korean and world history. Now after this, Yi Sun-shin would have one final battle, the Battle of Noryang, in which the Korean Joseon dynasty teamed up with the Ming dynasty and completely destroyed the Japanese fleet, effectively destroying Japanese supply lines and thus ending the war. Unfortunately, however, during this battle, Yi Sun-shin was shot and succumbed to his wounds. However, before he died, he said this to a fellow officer: "Continue to beat the drums and wear my armor. Do not announce my death." And with this, Yi Sun-shin's story comes to a close. And what a story it was, from rising through the ranks of the military to getting tortured, only to come back and win a 13 versus 133 battle, which many considered to be impossible. He cements his legacy as the greatest Korean commander, as well as just one of the greatest commanders in all of history. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more stories about Asia, then please subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you next time.